December 29th, 1888. A famous American artist sits in a London theater watching Shakespeare's bloodiest tragedy unfold. What he sees that night will obsess him so completely that he'll create one of the most iconic portraits in art history. But here's the twist. The most famous scene in the painting never actually happened in the play. John Singer Sargent arrived at London's Lyceum Theatre expecting a typical night of entertainment. Instead, he witnessed Ellen Terry's Lady Macbeth. A performance so electrifying, he became determined to capture her essence on canvas while still in costume. What started as artistic fandom became one of the most celebrated portraits of the Victorian era. Dame Ellen Terry, already a theatrical legend at 41, was starring opposite Henry Irving in this new production of Macbeth. But Sargent wasn't interested in Irving. He was completely captivated by Terry's commanding stage presence and her extraordinary costume that shimmered like serpent scales under the theater lights. But why was Sargent so moved by a single performance that he'd risk his reputation to paint it? John Singer Sargent was no ordinary painter. Born in Florence to American parents, this 32-year-old had already scandalized Paris with his provocative portrait, Madame X. A painting so controversial, he fled to London to escape the backlash. By 1888, he was rebuilding his career, specializing in glamorous portraits of society's elite. Sargent moved in exclusive circles, befriending impressionists like Claude Monet while developing his own signature style, bold brushstrokes that captured not just appearance, but personality. His portraits of wealthy women were particularly sought after, combining luxurious fabrics with psychological insight that revealed character beneath the surface. He was also fascinated by performance. Earlier works like El Jaleo showed Spanish flamenco dancers with such energy you could almost hear the music. Sargent understood that great art captured movement, emotion, and that indefinable spark of life. But the woman who would become his most famous subject had a story even more dramatic than his own paintings. Ellen Terry's life read like a soap opera. She'd been performing since age 9 alongside her sister, becoming a seasoned professional before most children learned to read properly. By 16, she'd caught the eye of the much older artist, George Frederick Watts, who painted her with an emphasis on youth and innocence that seems almost predatory today. Watts was so infatuated, he married her just before her 17th birthday, despite their 30-year age gap. The marriage lasted only 10 months. Terry couldn't fit into his intellectual circle, and the relationship crumbled. What happened next shocked Victorian society. Terry began living openly with architect Edward Godwin, having 2 children out of wedlock. Absolutely scandalous for the time. After they separated, she married another actor, but that union also ended in divorce after 3 years. By 1888, Terry had transformed her controversial personal life into theatrical gold. She was one of the most celebrated actresses of her generation, known for bringing depth and humanity to Shakespeare's most complex female characters. But it was her collaboration with Henry Irving that would create the performance of a lifetime and the costume that would make art history. The Lyceum Theatre's 1888 production of Macbeth was a massive undertaking. Irving and Terry had already conquered London with multiple Shakespearean productions, and this Macbeth was designed to be their masterpiece. It ran for 6 months to sold-out crowds before touring America. Sargent initially planned to paint an actual scene from the play, Terry striding from the castle to greet King Duncan. But then he had a different vision. Terry dramatically raising the Scottish crown above her head, preparing to place it on her own brow. Here's where it gets interesting. This moment never happened in Shakespeare's play. Not in the original text, not in Irving's production, nowhere. Sargent invented it entirely, creating a pose that captured Lady Macbeth's naked ambition in a single, powerful gesture. Now, Terry's own daughter later criticized this choice, calling it misleading. But Sargent understood something crucial. Sometimes artistic truth matters more than literal accuracy. The pose he created revealed the character's essence more powerfully than any scene could, and the costume Terry wore would become almost as famous as the painting itself. Designed by Alice Combs Carr and crafted by dressmaker Adeline Nettleship, this wasn't just clothing, it was theatrical magic made manifest. The base was emerald green silk. But here's where it gets incredible. They sewed over 1,000 real Beetle Wing cases into the fabric. Yep, you heard right, real Beetle Wing. Under the stage lights, the dress shimmered and moved like living scales, earning comparisons to a serpent's skin. The bodice was hand-knitted with wool and metallic thread to suggest soft chainmail, while gold trim and a purple velvet cloak completed the regal, yet sinister look. The costume was designed to work with Terry's wig of long red hair, braided and woven with gold threads. The entire effect was both beautiful and unsettling, perfect for Lady Macbeth's seductive evil. But critics were divided. The Times described it as garish green stuff, noting that Terry's interpretation emphasized tenderness over martial ambition. But audiences were mesmerized, and so was Sargent. Sargent started the portrait sessions almost immediately after opening night, despite Terry's initial reluctance. Terry wanted to wait until the play's success was assured. Working in his studio, he made bold artistic choices. Instead of painting the dress in its actual emerald green, he shifted it towards blue, apparently on advice from pre-Raphaelite painter Edward Burne-Jones, who visited the studio. Combined with a rich ultramarine background, this created a stunning color harmony with Terry's red hair. The result was pure pre-Raphaelite magic. Terry herself described it as, "The whole thing is Rossetti, rich stained glass effects." But Sargent went deeper than just pretty colors. Look at Terry's face in the painting, ghostly pale, with blood-red lips and wide, almost wild eyes. Sargent captures both the murder she'll help to commit and her eventual descent into madness. The flowing sleeves suggest water, foreshadowing her obsession with washing away Duncan's blood. The painting was finished in time for the New Gallery's summer exhibition, where it caused a sensation. Some critics complained about painting a music hall performer with the same grandeur as society portraits. But Sargent understood something they missed. Great performers, whether society ladies or stage actresses, all possess that indefinable quality of presence that made them worth immortalizing. Henry Irving, who produced the play, bought the painting immediately. He hung it in the beefsteak room of the Lyceum Theatre, where it became almost as famous as the performances themselves. What started as artistic fandom, one theatergoer so moved by a performance he had to capture it, became something much more significant. The portrait showcased both Sargent's genius as a painter and Terry's power as a performer, creating a work that transcended both art and theater.